For the first etude, the etude is in mixed meters, so it goes from 3/4 and 3/8 back and forth over and over again. And this can be really confusing to count. So if you look between the first and second measure, there's a marking that says parentheses, eighth note equals eighth note. The eighth note beat stays consistent all the way throughout. So if you set the metronome to the eighth note, you can keep the same tempo all the way throughout. It's definitely a good way to start practicing this etude, especially in the early stages when you're practicing a little bit slower. Watch out for the dynamics all the way throughout. There are a couple sudden changes all the way throughout the etude. In measure 8, there is a multi retard, which means slow down a lot. So you want to take those 3 notes, slow them way down, and then measure 9, there's an odd tempo. So immediately after you get out of that, right back in tempo again. All the way throughout, it's in 3 sharps. So you want to mark all these sharps in here, but you have B's and C sharps in the middle of the staff. Would highly recommend keeping all the B's on the right pinky and all the C sharps on the left pinky. As we get to the end, be sure the last measure, it's a dotted half note. So be sure you count that out and be sure you hold it full value before you cut it off. Etude number 2 is in a really bad key signature. It's in 5 flats, so B, E, A, D, and G. It's a key we almost rarely see, so you definitely want to go through this etude, mark in all the flashes to be sure you're playing them all correctly. Despite having a lot of ink on the page, it's a very slow etude. It's marked eighth note equals 72, so don't let all the fast notes that are written on the page fool you. It is a slow etude. There's a lot of pinky work in this etude, so you definitely want to mark L's and R's for left and right where you want to play. You definitely don't want to play multiple pinkies in a row in the same hand. It's going to make it really hard to play. In measure 7, there's a term called stringendo, so this part will slowly speed up a little bit. Still want to keep the slow character, but it will slowly gain more speed until we get to measure 10, where it says rallentando a tempo. So that measure, it will slow back down into tempo again. At the odd tempo, un poco minimoso, which starts at bar 11 after the double bar, be sure the tempo is just a little bit slower, just a little bit noticeably slower. And then we have a multi retard the last couple bars. Really pull it back at the end. Try to be very musical throughout this etude. Every note producing the best sound you possibly can, and really do the dynamics. There's some big dynamic shifts in this piece, and we want to be sure we do them. This is the lyrical etude, so the judges are going to really be looking for musicality in this etude. Etude number 3 moves at a pretty fast pace. So it's marked at half note equal 100. So it moves fast. Definitely in the early stages when you practice this, you want to play it on the slower side to be sure you're playing all the notes and rhythms correctly. If you want to keep the quarter note all the way throughout, quarter note 200 is what you're aiming for to equal the half note 100 tempo. Throughout this entire etude, you want to be sure your fingers are nice and relaxed and staying really, really close to the instrument. As you watch me perform it, watch my fingers really, really closely to be sure you'll see that my fingers stay really, really close. If they go far away, you're going to have a hard time keeping up with the speed in this etude. It's marked 100, but you want to play around this and find out how fast you can go and have everything be nice and clean as far as the technique, and also be sure what tempo you can take it at to be sure the pulse is steady all the way throughout. It's better to take it at a slower tempo and be sure the pulse is nice and steady than to go faster and have it speed up and slow down all the way throughout. Some things to watch out for in this etude. In measures 10 and 11, you have high notes that are really, really soft. You have a high note C in bar 10, high note D in bar 11. that are marked piano, and then you have lower note runs that are marked at forte. So it's kind of a strange musical concept that doesn't come up all that much. So you want to really be sure you exaggerate those dynamics. You want to be sure also the top notes, the C's and the D's, you play them loud enough that we still have a good tone to them too as well. It can be really easy if you play them too soft to have the tone suffer a little bit too as well. As you go through this, as you work on this etude, I would highly encourage you to work it up slowly. Don't try to get all the tempo up at once. Try to get a little bit each day as you get closer to the audition. It'll make life a lot easier for you. And we'll also be sure when you get to the faster tempos, it's going to be a lot cleaner. Etude 4 is another mixed meter etude. There's all kinds of time signature changes all the way throughout here. The one thing that does stay consistent all the way throughout here is the eighth note pulse. So you can keep the eighth note on to stay consistent all the way throughout. And I would definitely recommend when you start working on this etude, keep the eighth note for the beat to help you a little bit as you go through here. In bar 4, there's a polka retard, so you want to be sure you slow it down a little bit in this bar. There's a breath mark at the end of the bar. I would take a breath and take a short pause right there. And bar 5, where you come back in at the odd tempo, just be sure you're right back in tempo when you come back in again. We have a multi retard that happens at bar 8 too as well. This one you want to really, really slow down, really be obvious with it. There's also a big crescendo underneath it too, where it goes mezzo piano to forte smoke. So if you really focus on the multi retard, really bring it down, you can do a lot with the crescendo too as well, which will help as well. Articulations all the way throughout are really important. There's a lot of accents, a lot of staccatos all the way throughout here. You want to be sure you're really bringing those out all the way through here. You want to be sure the pulse stays consistent, it drives ahead. And with the mixed meter, this can be very, very difficult. As you start to get the tempo faster with the eighth note, then you can start putting together with the meters on the piece. But be sure you were really clear about the 5/8 are, the 6/8 are, and when we get to the 4/4s in here too as well. In etude number 5, we have 4 sharps in the key signatures, F, C, G, and D. Definitely want to be sure you go through this etude and mark where all these sharps are before you get started. In the second measure, there's a double sharp written in there. There's an F double sharp on the last 16th note. That's the same as a G natural. Double sharps don't come up too often, so if you're wondering what that X mark is, that's what it is. There's a lot of pinky work in this throughout this entire etude. So definitely want to mark L's and R's all the way throughout here. And there's a lot of strange pinky combinations, ones we don't see very often here too, because of the key it's in. So definitely want to be sure you go through and mark those so you be sure you know which ones to play on the left, which ones to play on the right. In measure 6, you have a trill from a G sharp to A. That's kind of a weird one. You want to be sure that you're really clean with those. Keep both those fingers really, really close to the instrument. Then after the trill, we have a G sharp eighth note on the next beat. Then we go down to a C sharp. You're going to need to keep this both on the same hand. You want to get your left pinky and take it from the G sharp and put it down to the C sharp. This is one of these rare instances when we play where we want to play 2 notes in a row on the same pinkies. Want to be sure your tone is really, really good all the way throughout this. This is the slow lyrical etude of the 3 all-state etudes. So really be sure you're supporting these notes really good. It's not a loud etude, it's piano or mezzo piano for most of the piece. So you want to be sure you really work to be sure you have a really good tone as you play it. This is the last thing the judges will hear at your all-state audition, so want to be sure that you leave them with a really good impression. At the very end, there's a retard at the very end. Pull it back quite a bit and be sure to take that last note and try to fade it away to nothing. 1s and 6/8, and it's marked at dotted quarter equals 72. In the early stages of practicing it, really highly suggest practicing it with the eighth note for the beat, just to be sure you've got all the rhythms correct. There are some weird rhythms that happen, especially when you start to get to measure 5 and 6 and 7 and 8. So playing it with the eighth note for the beat can help be sure you've got the rhythms correct right from the get-go. Throughout, you want to watch your articulations. There's a lot of articulations all the way throughout, so you want to be sure you're very clear with your articulations, and you want to be sure that the judge can clearly hear what the accents are, what the staccatos are, and there are some legatos in here too as well. And the last measure is a poco retard. You want to pull it back just a little bit, just enough so we know what you're doing with that. Throughout the entire piece, you want to be sure the pulse stays nice and steady all the way throughout. It's not that fast, but the steadiness with the pulse is really important. Etude number 2 has 3 sharps in the key signatures, F, C, and G. You want to be sure you go through this etude, mark where they all are, just to be sure you're getting them all correct right from the get-go. In the first full bar and in the second to last bar, we have a musical symbol that's called a turn. It looks like a sideways S. And what this is it's a little ornamentation where we're going to add some extra notes in here to fancy up the rhythm around it. So if you look at the shape of the symbol, the sideways S, it goes up, comes back down, and then goes back up again. That's basically what we want to do. So we want to be sure since they're both the same both times, so we want to be sure after the dotted quarter note we fit in we go from A up to a B natural, back down to an A, to a G sharp, and then back up to an A, and then we go to the B natural eighth note that's written on the page. How you want to start working on this is you want to practice those measures first without the turn in. Just play them regular, pretend the turn doesn't exist. And then you're going to want to fit the notes around it. If you listen to my recording, you'll kind of see how that works and how to do that. So listen very, very carefully to that. So I would definitely start practicing this one with the eighth note for the beat. It is slow. It's only 56 for the chord note, but there's a lot of complex rhythms in here too as well. So taking the eighth note for the beat is going to really help you be sure you're playing all the rhythms correctly all the way throughout this piece. Pay attention to the dynamics and also be sure you're producing a really, really good tone all the way throughout here too as well. This is the slow etude of the 3 regional etudes, so we want to be sure we really showcase our tone throughout the entire piece. In etude number 3, we have 2 flats for the key signatures, B and E. Be sure you go and mark them all the way throughout the etude. As you take a look through here, there's a lot of articulations in here, and I want to draw attention to one particular articulation. So if you look at bars 3 and 4, then also at bars 11 and 12, there's an accent with a dot. This is what we call lifted accents. So we want to be sure we accent the note, but we put some space in there too as well. This may be an articulation you haven't seen very often, but that's what it means. You want to be sure the tempo stays nice and steady all the way throughout here. You want to be sure from start to finish that the pulse is steady and that we don't have any fluctuations. It doesn't get faster, it doesn't get slower. Measure 5 is a very, very tricky measure. It jumps around quite a bit and between registers. It's very, very tricky. You're going to want to see how fast you can play measure 5, and that should be your however fast you can play measure 5. That's how fast you want to play the rest of the piece. You want to be sure that measure can come out cleanly. So if that isn't quite up to the 92 tempo mark, I would take it a little slower and take the entire etude a little bit on the slower side too as well. It's better to have a fast etude a little bit on the slow side, everything clean, pulse nice and steady, than to go fast and have it be sloppy or have the tempo be erratic all the way throughout here too as well. There's a legato section that starts at measure 5 too as well. You want the notes to be very, very smooth here. Full value, very low tongue, very, very light all the way throughout. So kind of a change in character a little bit as we go through here. Be sure in the last bar you don't let up on the tempo at all. There's no retard written, so be sure you go all the way to the end too as well. Pay attention to the dynamics all the way throughout here too as well. It does change pretty quickly in some spots in here too as well. And be sure you keep your fingers nice and relaxed. Be sure they can move really quickly. This is the fastest one of the 3 etudes in the regional audition. So definitely want to be sure that you're showcasing your fingers really good on this etude. Etude number 4 has an F sharp and the C sharp. The key signature, you want to be sure you go ahead and mark all those in. You're allowed to mark as much as you want in your music when you go and take these auditions, so definitely want to take advantage of that. It's a mixed meter etude. It goes between 6/8 and 2/4 all the way throughout here. If you notice between the first and the second measure, there's a marking that says parentheses 8th note equals 8th note. The 8th note pulse stays consistent all the way throughout. So definitely would encourage you when you practice, especially the beginning stages, to be sure you take the 8th note for the beat and be sure the rhythms are really accurate and make sense too as well. Pay careful attention to the articulations all the way throughout here too as well. There's a lot of them and they're kind of all over the place and they change a lot. So you're going to see, especially if you take a look at measure 3, measure 12, you have 3 consecutive notes in a row with 3 different articulations. So I want to be sure you really pay attention to that. When you practice slowly, a good thing to do is to be sure you get the articulations going too as well. They can be hard to kind of figure out if you try to play it fast. There's a multiple legato section in measure 8. That means very smooth. Just be sure it's really, really, really smooth all throughout here. Notice the articulations all have lines over them too as well. Also, the dynamics are a lot softer in this section too as well. It's forte both before and after the multiple legato section. And this one's mezzo piano with a small crescendo of the mezzo forte in the middle. So you want to bring out that change in the middle there too as well. And the last bar is a polka retard, so you want to slow it down just a little bit, but not too much. Etude number 5 has 5 flats in the key signature. This is a key you probably may have never seen in the piece of music. It doesn't come up that often. So B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat, and G flat. You want to definitely go through and double check you've got all of those marked all the way throughout. You want to work hard to really produce a really good tone on this etude. So it's very slow. And it's also the lyrical etude of the 3 all-state etudes. So you want to be sure you're working really hard to produce the best tone you can all the way throughout this etude. So at the beginning, it's marked molto espressivo e poco rubato. Molto espressivo means very expressive. So you want to do a lot with your tone, a lot with the dynamics. Poco rubato means a little bit free. So you can be a little bit free with the tempo here at the beginning to add to the musical effect if you'd like to. In bar 3, we have a term that's called affrettinato. This doesn't show up very much in music. It basically means becoming faster. So if you want to just very slowly throughout this part, just be sure you're building the tempo just a little bit. On the recording, you can kind of hear what that sounds like. And then in bar 4 is a polka retard where it comes back down a little bit too as well. So it's going to build tempo a little bit, come down a little bit in measures 3 and 4. All right. Once you get to fermata at 4, cut off the note and take a little bit of a break. And then when you come in at 5, tempo is slightly slower. It's 52 at the beginning. It's 46 here. Just a little bit slower, just enough so it's slightly noticeable in here. And then in the last 2 bars, there's a molto rondo. You want to really slow it down quite a bit. And you want to take that last note and fade away to nothing. Also be sure all the way throughout here that all the notes are speaking the same way. You jump around registers quite a bit. A lot of jumping notes and octaves. So you want to be sure all the notes have the same tone quality. You're connecting the dots really well, and you're being very musical with it.